I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped onto Flight 447. But hindsight is a cruel teacher, and that morning I was too consumed by my own troubles to notice the subtle wrongness in the air around me. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm a financial auditor, which sounds boring until you realize that boring jobs sometimes uncover the most dangerous secrets. And 3 weeks before that flight, I had stumbled onto something that made my blood run cold. Sitting in my cramped office going through routine documents for Meridian Aerospace, I found discrepancies that didn't make sense. Millions of dollars moving through shell companies, maintenance records that had been altered, safety inspections that were falsified, and at the center of it all was Flight 447, a plane that, according to my findings, should never have been cleared to fly. But I was young and ambitious and stupid enough to think I could handle this myself. So I compiled everything into a single encrypted file, planning to present it to the authorities after my business trip to Seattle. And that's why I was on that plane, clutching my laptop like it contained the nuclear codes, because in a way it did contain something explosive enough to destroy careers and lives and bring down an entire corporation worth billions. And as I settled into my economy seat, 3 rows from the emergency exit, I felt the weight of that knowledge pressing down on my chest like a physical force, making it hard to breathe. But I told myself I was being paranoid, that the nervous energy coursing through my veins was just pre-flight jitters mixed with too much coffee and not enough sleep. And then she appeared, the flight attendant, with the name tag that read Sarah Mitchell. Her face was pale, her hands were trembling slightly as she pushed the beverage cart down the aisle. And when she reached my row, she stopped, and our eyes met. And in that instant, I saw something that made my paranoia crystallize into cold, hard fear. Because her eyes weren't just nervous, they were terrified. And she leaned down close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive. And she whispered, so quietly that I almost didn't hear her, "You have to get off this plane immediately." And my first instinct, the one that probably saved my life, was to refuse. Because every fiber of my being screamed that this wasn't a warning. This was a setup disguised as concern. And I had spent enough time investigating corporate corruption to recognize a setup when I saw one. So I looked her straight in the eye and said in a voice that was steadier than I felt, "I'm not going anywhere." And the flash of panic that crossed her face confirmed everything I needed to know.
She straightened up quickly, her professional mask sliding back into place, but her hands were shaking worse now, and she moved on down the aisle, but I could feel her looking back at me. And I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was supposed to happen on this flight, I had just thrown a wrench into someone's carefully laid plans. And my mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. Because why would they want me off the plane? Unless the plan was to make it look like I never boarded. Unless they needed me to disappear in a way that couldn't be traced back to them. And suddenly, the discrepancies I had found took on a whole new meaning. Because if they were willing to falsify maintenance records, what else were they willing to do? And I thought about the encrypted file on my laptop, the backup copies I had hidden in 3 different locations, the email I had scheduled to send to the SEC if I didn't cancel it within 48 hours. And I realized that I had underestimated how far they will go to protect their secrets. And the plane was starting to fill up now. Passengers shuffling down the aisle, stowing luggage in overhead compartments, settling into their seats, completely unaware that they might be pawns in something much bigger and darker than a simple flight to Seattle. And I watched them all carefully, looking for anything out of place. And that's when I noticed him, a man in an expensive suit sitting 2 rows ahead on the opposite side of the aisle. And he kept glancing back at me, quick, furtive looks that he thought were subtle, but I caught every single one. And when Sarah, the flight attendant, walked past him, she touched his shoulder briefly, a gesture that could have been accidental, but wasn't. And he nodded, almost imperceptibly. And my heart was pounding now, because this wasn't just about getting me off the plane anymore. this was about something much worse. And I had to think, had to figure out what they were planning, because knowledge was my only weapon. And I was outnumbered and trapped in a metal tube about to hurtle through the sky at 500 miles per hour.
But then something unexpected happened. The plane suddenly decelerated, the engines powered down, and we came to a stop on the runway. And the captain's voice came over the intercom, apologizing for a technical issue, saying we needed to return to the gate for a quick maintenance check. And James's face went pale, and I realized he hadn't expected this either. And as we taxied back, I saw emergency vehicles through the window, fire trucks, police cars, ambulances, and my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Holy hell, Marcus, I got your message and called the FBI. They're at the airport now." And suddenly I understood that my gamble had paid off, that sending that message had triggered a response bigger than I could have imagined. And the plane pulled up to the gate and the door opened and FBI agents swarmed aboard. And James tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. And they took him into custody and they took Sarah aside to question her. And they asked me to come with them. And as I walked off that plane, carrying my laptop with its encrypted files, I looked back and saw all those passengers confused and annoyed about the delay, completely unaware that they had just been saved from something terrible. And over the next few weeks, the investigation unfolded. And what we discovered was worse than I had imagined, because it wasn't just about financial fraud. It was about a systematic pattern of cutting corners, of putting profits over safety of planes that were flying with faulty parts and inadequate maintenance. And Flight 447 had been scheduled for a catastrophic failure, a failure that would have been blamed on mechanical error, on bad luck, on anything except corporate negligence. And I would have been on that plane, would have died along with everyone else, and the evidence would have died with me, and Meridian Aerospace would have continued their practices, would have kept cutting corners, kept putting passengers at risk, kept making billions while people died. And Sarah testified too. Told them how they had threatened her family, how they had forced her to try to get me off the plane because my death was supposed to look like I had missed the flight, was supposed to be untraceable. And she cried when she talked about the other flight attendants who had tried to speak up, who had raised concerns about safety, and who had been silenced or fired or worse. The trial was massive front-page news for months, and the CEO of Meridian Aerospace went to prison, along with James Peterson and 6 other executives, and the company was bankrupted by lawsuits and fines, and the aviation industry was forced to implement new oversight, new safety protocols, new protections for whistleblowers. And I became something of an accidental hero, though I never felt like one, because all I had done was refuse to get off a plane, was trust my instincts when someone tried to manipulate me through fear. And the irony wasn't lost on me, that the very thing they tried to use against me, my presence on that flight, had become the thing that exposed them. Because if they had just let me fly, if they had just taken their chances that I wouldn't go public or that my evidence wouldn't be believed, they might have gotten away with it. But their fear had made them reckless, had made them reveal the depths of their corruption. And in trying to silence me, they had amplified my voice beyond anything I could have achieved alone. And I thought a lot about that moment when Sarah had whispered her warning, about how close I had come to making the wrong choice. Because if I had trusted her, if I had believed she was genuinely trying to help me, I would have gotten off that plane. And I would have walked right into whatever trap they had prepared, and I would have disappeared, and no one would have known the truth. And sometimes late at night, I still wonder about all the people who did trust, who did get off planes when they were warned, who did walk into traps, and who vanished without anyone knowing why. And I think about how many Marcus Webbs there might have been before me, people who found evidence of corruption, who tried to do the right thing, and who were silenced before they could speak. And it haunts me, the knowledge that I survived, not because I was smarter or braver, but because I was paranoid enough to see the manipulation, suspicious enough to refuse the easy path, and lucky enough that my friend David took my message seriously and acted fast enough to save not just me, but everyone on that plane. And Sarah, I saw her again, months after the trial, after she had been cleared of all charges, after it was established that she had been coerced and threatened, and she apologized to me with tears streaming down her face. And I told her she had nothing to apologize for because she was a victim too. And she told me something that I think about every day. She said when they first approached her, when they first threatened her family, she had gone to her supervisor, had tried to report it. And her supervisor had told her to keep quiet, had implied that speaking up would only make things worse. And that was when she realized how deep the corruption went, how many people were complicit, how many had chosen to look the other way because it was easier, because it was safer, because standing up to power seemed impossible. And she said that watching me refuse to get off that plane, watching me stand my ground, even when I had to have been terrified, had given her the courage to testify, had shown her that one person saying no could actually matter. And I told her that she had saved my life too, because her fear had been so genuine, had been so visible, that it had triggered my suspicion, had made me question what should have seemed like a simple warning. And together, we had unraveled a conspiracy that had been years in the making, and we had saved lives, hundreds of lives, maybe thousands, because those faulty planes were grounded, because those safety protocols were changed, because the people responsible were held accountable. And now, years later, I still fly, and every time I board a plane, I think about Flight 447, and I look at the flight attendants and I wonder what secrets they might carry, what pressures they might face, what warnings they might be forced to deliver. And I'm grateful for my paranoia, for my stubborn refusal to be manipulated, for the instinct that told me that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is trust the wrong person at the wrong time. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to comply, refuse to be moved, refuse to let fear dictate your choices. And the encrypted files on my laptop, they became evidence, Exhibit A in the trial that changed aviation safety forever. And every time I see a plane take off safely, every time I hear about new regulations protecting whistleblowers, every time I think about all those passengers who will never know how close they came to disaster, I feel a complicated mixture of pride and sorrow. Because yes, we won. Yes, justice was served. Yes, the bad guys went to prison. But it should have never gotten that far. Should have never required one stubborn auditor refusing to get off a plane. Should have never put hundreds of innocent lives at risk. And the real tragedy isn't just what almost happened on Flight 447. It's how many Flight 447s might still be out there. How many other companies might be cutting corners right now? How many other whistleblowers might be silenced before they can speak? How many other conspiracies might be hidden just below the surface, waiting for someone brave enough or paranoid enough or lucky enough to expose them? And I carry that weight every day, the knowledge that my survival was a combination of instinct and luck, and that countless others might not be so fortunate. And so I tell this story not because I want to be celebrated, but because I want people to understand that the systems we trust, the institutions we rely on, are only as strong as the people who refuse to look away, who refuse to stay silent, who refuse to get off the plane when someone in authority tells them to. And sometimes doing the right thing means being difficult, means being suspicious, means trusting your gut even when everyone around you thinks you're crazy. And if my story does anything, I hope it inspires at least one person to ask questions, to dig deeper, to refuse to accept easy answers, to stand their ground when something feels wrong. Because that's how we protect each other. That's how we hold power accountable. That's how we ensure that tragedies like the one that almost happened on Flight 447 never happen again. And every time I fly now, every time I'm 30,000 feet in the air, I remember that moment when Sarah whispered her warning. And I remember refusal. And I remember that sometimes saving your own life means having the courage to say no.